Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside to enjoy your peaceful farm, only to find a massive, ugly garage built right in the middle of your land, without your permission. And the worst part, the culprit is none other than Karen from the HOA, who somehow thinks she now owns my property. What follows is a battle of insane entitlement, legal chaos, and the ultimate Karen meltdown that will leave you questioning reality. Trust me, you do not want to miss this story, because if you think you've seen bad HOAs before, you haven't seen anything like this. Hello, beautiful peoples. Before we dive in, let me know, where are you watching this from? Tell us in the comments and subscribe. I woke up early, the crisp morning air filling my lungs as I stepped outside to start another peaceful day on my farm. The familiar sight of my land stretching out before me was always a comforting one. But today, something was different. Something was very, very wrong. Right there, in the middle of my property, stood a massive metal garage. Not a shed, not a simple structure. An actual 3-car garage, complete with a concrete driveway that extended far beyond where it should. My brain struggled to process what I was looking at. This wasn't here yesterday. How in the world did this happen overnight? At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe I was still half asleep. But as I walked closer, the harsh reality hit me like a truck. This thing was real, and it was on my land. My land. Who in their right mind would build something this huge here without permission? My confusion quickly turned into anger. I stormed toward the monstrosity, expecting to find some confused construction workers who had clearly made a mistake. But instead, standing there like a queen surveying her kingdom, was none other than Karen. Arms crossed, chin raised, the smug expression on her face told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. "Oh, you're finally here," she said, as if I were some guest arriving late to her housewarming party. "I was wondering when you'd come admire my new garage." Admire? The audacity of this woman was almost impressive. Almost. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to keep my voice calm, even though I could feel the rage bubbling beneath the surface. "Karen, what the hell is this?" I gestured wildly at the building. She blinked at me like I had just asked her why the sky was blue. "It's my new garage. Isn't it lovely?" I made sure it met all HOA standards. HOA standards. My eye twitched. This was my farm. I wasn't part of any HOA. I had made sure of that when I bought the property. "Karen," I said slowly, trying to keep my composure, "you built this on my land. Without my permission." She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a garage. And technically, this area falls under HOA regulations now, so I had to make some improvements." "You're welcome. You're welcome." As if she had done me a favor by stealing my land and constructing a giant metal eyesore on it. I clenched my fists. "No, Karen. My property is not part of the HOA. It never has been." She sighed, giving me a look that suggested she thought I was being difficult for no reason. "Well, actually, the HOA recently reviewed the property lines and determined that this section fits within our jurisdiction. We even sent you a notice." "A notice?" I had never received any notice. Karen, sensing my skepticism, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. I took one look at it and almost laughed. It wasn't an official document. It looked like something she had typed up herself in Comic Sans, with the words "Official HOA Property Expansion" written across the top. "You've got to be kidding me." Karen puffed up, as if offended that I didn't immediately accept her ridiculous claim. "It's all perfectly legal." No, it wasn't. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I stormed off to speak with the HOA board, expecting some level-headed discussion. Instead, I walked into a meeting that felt more like a high school clique gathered to gossip. Karen sat at the center of the table, flanked by 2 other women who looked just as smug as she did. One of them, a woman named Linda, adjusted her glasses and gave me a saccharine smile. "Oh, you must be here about the new garage. It really is a wonderful addition to the community." I gritted my teeth. "It's not a community. It's my farm." The other board member, a man who looked like he hadn't made a single independent decision in years, shuffled some papers and cleared his throat. "According to our new zoning proposal, that land now falls under HOA governance." "And who approved that?" I shot back. "Well, the board did," Karen answered sweetly. "It was a unanimous vote." Of course, it was unanimous. It was just them making the decision for themselves. My patience was wearing thin. "You can't just take my land and decide it belongs to the HOA." Karen rolled her eyes. "It's not just about ownership. Your property needs to align with the aesthetics of the neighborhood. That barn of yours? An eyesore. Your tractor? Completely out of place. This garage, this beautiful modern structure, adds value. I had heard enough. I slammed my hands on the table. You have one day to tear that thing down, or I will. Karen gasped as if I had just threatened her very existence. That's destruction of property. It's on my property. She sputtered for a moment before regaining her composure. You'll be fined for any damages to HOA property. I stared at her, barely believing what I was hearing. It's not HOA property. Well, that's up for debate, she said with a smirk. I left before I could say something I'd regret. But as I walked back to my farm, I knew one thing for certain. Karen and her little HOA weren't going to back down easily. They thought they could steal my land, build whatever they wanted, and get away with it. They were wrong. I woke up the next morning still fuming, half hoping that maybe I had just imagined the entire situation. But the moment I stepped outside and saw that oversized, out-of-place garage still sitting there like a sore thumb on my farm, reality hit me all over again. This wasn't going to be an easy fix. Karen wasn't just going to admit she was wrong and take the garage down. No, she was going to dig in her heels and make this as painful as possible. I could already see her prancing around near the garage, a smug grin plastered across her face as she inspected her precious new structure. I marched over, determined to give her one last warning before I took things to the next level. Karen, I'm only going to say this once. You have exactly 24 hours to remove this garage from my property before I do it myself. She turned to me with a look of mock concern. Oh, sweetie, you can't just take down someone else's property. That would be illegal. You mean like how you illegally built this on my land? She waved me off as if I were an annoying child. The HOA already approved it. This land is part of the association now. You'll just have to accept that and start following the rules. My blood boiled. But before I could respond, she pulled out a clipboard. Speaking of which, I have a few notices for you. Notices? She handed me a stack of papers filled with the most ridiculous fines I had ever seen in my life. $500 for improper landscaping. Apparently, my fields weren't aesthetically pleasing. $250 for an unapproved mailbox, the same mailbox I had for over a decade. $300 for having a non-regulation fence, a fence that had been there long before the HOA even existed. I stared at the papers, then at her, half expecting this to be some kind of elaborate joke. You've got to be kidding me. Oh, I'm very serious, she said, crossing her arms. We can't have people just doing whatever they want. This neighborhood has standards. Karen, I said slowly, this isn't a neighborhood. It's a farm. She gasped, clutching her pearls like I had just insulted her entire bloodline. That is exactly the kind of attitude that is ruining this community. I had enough. If Karen wanted to play dirty, fine. Two could play that game. That night, I made sure my animals got a little extra freedom. The next morning, Karen woke up to find that my goats had discovered her brand new garage. And let's just say, they were very interested in it. They chewed on her fancy new bushes. They climbed on her car, leaving hoof prints and other surprises all over the hood. One particularly mischievous goat, Steve, even made himself comfortable on the garage roof, looking down at Karen like he owned the place. Her shrieks could probably be heard from 3 towns over. Your wild animals are destroying HOA property. I casually strolled over. Oh, I thought this was my property? You need to control them. They're trespassing, she screeched, trying to shoo them away, which only seemed to amuse them further. I shrugged. Funny, I don't recall seeing any HOA rules about farm animals. Her eye twitched. They don't belong here. Neither does your garage. She stomped off in a huff, but I knew she wasn't done. If anything, I had just made things worse. The next day, I came home to find that Karen had taken things one step further. She had hired a crew to build a fence around her garage. Not just any fence, an ugly, bright white vinyl HOA-style fence that cut right into my land. She had literally fenced off part of my farm, as if it belonged to her. I saw red. I stormed over just as the workers were finishing up. Karen stood nearby, watching with a satisfied smile. Oh good, you're here. I was just making sure my property stays safe from unwanted guests. You tore down my fence to put up this? She put on her most innocent face. I had to. Your fence didn't meet HOA standards, and it was simply ruining the look of the community. I clenched my jaw so hard it was a miracle my teeth didn't crack. Karen, you are trespassing. Again. She rolled her eyes. Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a little fence. That cuts off my land. Well, that's just an unfortunate side effect. She gave me a fake sympathetic look. But if you'd just join the HOA, we could work all of this out. I took a deep breath. No way was I letting this woman think she had won. I pulled out my phone, snapped several photos of the fence, and made one call that would change everything. Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I didn't waste a single second. As soon as I got back to my house, I forwarded the pictures of the fence, the garage, and every ridiculous HOA fine Karen had thrown my way to my lawyer. Within an hour, I was on the phone with him, and the moment he started laughing, I knew I had them. "This is completely illegal," he said, still chuckling. "They can't just redraw property lines on their own. And the fines? They have zero authority to charge you anything." I leaned back, finally feeling a sense of relief. "So what do we do?" "Oh, this is going to be fun," he said. The next morning, I sent Karen and the HOA an official legal notice. The message was crystal clear. They had no legal claim over my land, and they had 30 days to remove the garage, the fence, and every last trace of their nonsense before we escalated this to court. The reaction was immediate. Karen showed up at my door within the hour, clutching the letter like it had personally insulted her ancestors. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her face turning red. "I can and I am," I said, enjoying the look of panic in her eyes. "This is harassment. You're just trying to intimidate me because I'm a woman." I sighed. "Karen, you built an entire garage on my land and tried to fine me for not following your ridiculous HOA rules. You do not get to play the victim here." She let out a dramatic gasp, like I had just slapped her with reality. "Well, I have rights. You can't just take away my property." I crossed my arms. "It's not your property, Karen. And if you don't remove it, the city will. At your expense." That hit her like a brick. She stomped away, but I wasn't dumb enough to think she'd actually back down. That same evening, Karen tried a new approach. I was in my barn finishing up when I saw a tow truck pulling into my driveway. I walked outside confused, until I saw Karen standing beside it, grinning like she had just won the lottery. "I'm here to impound your tractor," she announced. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "According to HOA regulations, you can't park commercial vehicles on residential property." She pulled out another one of her fake notices, this one written in bright red ink like she thought it would make it more official. "Karen, this is a farm. It's not residential property." "Well, it should be," she snapped. I turned to the tow truck driver, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I suggest you leave before you get involved in an actual lawsuit." The guy took one look at Karen's side and climbed back into his truck. Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't just ignore HOA regulations," she screamed. "Karen," I said, turning to her with the biggest smile I could manage, "you don't have an HOA anymore." She blinked. "Asterisk what? Asterisk." Oh yeah, while Karen was busy playing petty games, my lawyer had been doing real work. After sending in the evidence, city officials launched a full investigation into the HOA's activities. Turns out, Karen and her little group had been illegally fining homeowners, forging property documents, and scamming people for years. By the next morning, the news had spread like wildfire. The city had officially dissolved the HOA for illegal activity. Every single one of their bogus fines? Voided. Every fake rule they tried to enforce? Gone. And as for Karen's beloved garage? The city gave her one option: tear it down, or they'd do it for her and send her the bill. I had never seen someone go from smug to panicked so fast. Karen tried everything, calling lawyers, filing complaints, even trying to get a petition going to reinstate the HOA. But no one wanted anything to do with her anymore. The very same neighbors who used to tolerate her nonsense were now celebrating her downfall. That's when Karen realized she had one last move left. She knocked on my door one final time, this time with a nervous smile. "So, I was thinking, maybe we could come to a little agreement." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of agreement?" "Well, since my garage is already there, maybe you'd be interested in buying it?" I stared at her. "You're asking me to buy the garage you built illegally on my land?" She nodded enthusiastically. "For a fair price, of course. Say $50,000. I burst out laughing so hard I had to hold onto the doorframe for support. "Karen, let me make this very clear. I wouldn't buy that thing for $5. Her face went pale. "But I spent so much money. That's not my problem." She tried arguing, but it was over. The city's deadline was coming up fast, and she had no way out. 2 weeks later, the demolition crew arrived. I sat back with a cold drink in hand as they ripped that garage apart piece by piece. Karen stood nearby, watching in horror as her dream garage crumbled to dust. "I'm calling my lawyer," she shrieked before stomping away. I grinned. Good luck with that. As the last pieces of the structure were hauled away, I took a deep breath. My farm was finally mine again. No HOA, no ridiculous fines, no entitled Karen trying to rule over what didn't belong to her. And the best part? Karen was so humiliated by the entire thing that she ended up selling her house and moving away. Peace. At last. A few weeks had passed since the garage met its well-deserved fate, and my farm finally felt like home again. No more HOA nonsense, no more ridiculous fines, and best of all, no more Karen. After her failed attempt to sell me the very garage she built illegally, she had gone into full meltdown mode. At first, she tried to appeal to the city, claiming she was being unfairly targeted and that demolishing the garage was an act of aggression. That argument lasted all of 5 minutes before officials reminded her, once again, that she had no legal claim to my land and had, in fact, been breaking multiple property laws. When that failed, she tried rallying the other HOA members to take a stand with her. Unfortunately for Karen, there was no HOA anymore. With the board officially disbanded, the neighborhood was finally free from their tyranny. The residents, people who had once either feared or tolerated her, were now celebrating her downfall. The same people she had once controlled with ridiculous fines and arbitrary rules were now openly mocking her. One guy down the street even set up a garage sale, complete with a huge sign that read, "Karen's HOA garage. Oh wait, it's gone." She was furious. Day by day, I watched as her smug confidence crumbled. The once proud ruler of the HOA had become a joke in the very community she tried to control. And then one morning, the final blow came. A giant for sale sign appeared in Karen's yard. She was leaving. I could barely believe it at first. But after everything that had happened, she had no choice. With no HOA power left, she couldn't bully her way into controlling people anymore. She had spent so much money trying to fight the demolition of the garage that she was now desperate to sell her house and get out. I won't lie, I may have had a little extra pep in my step that day. A few weeks later, moving trucks showed up, and Karen, red-faced, bitter, and defeated, packed up and left. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even look in my direction. Just like that, she was gone. For the first time in ages, the neighborhood felt peaceful. The neighbors, free from Karen's reign of terror, actually started talking to each other. They shared drinks, invited each other over, and for the first time in years, it felt like a real community. And as for me, I got my land back, my farm was thriving, and I never had to deal with another fake HOA fine ever again. The best part? I threw a no more HOA barbecue in celebration. Everyone was invited. Well, asterisk asterisk almost everyone, asterisk asterisk. Wherever Karen was, I hoped she had finally learned the most important lesson of all. If you try to mess with a farmer, you better be ready for the harvest.